My guest today is Kia McNeill. Kia's professional playing career spanned the founding of both women's professional soccer in 2009 and the NWSL, where she last played with the Boston Breakers in 2014. Today, Kia is the head women's soccer coach at Brown University, whom she has led to 4 Ivy League championships. Kia certainly talks about the financial challenges that she faced during her playing career, but she also offers advice to young players who are considering going professional today. And if so, what circumstances might be the right fit for them? And if you're interested in coaching, you may want to hear her advice for potential coaches. Here's my conversation with Kia McNeill. Kia, I'm absolutely delighted to have you here because you've had so many professional experiences amid so much change and growth in the women's game, both as a player and a coach. And so I'm really excited to hear about your experiences. Maybe we start back at Boston College, where you played collegiately. Talk to me about when you were finishing your time at BC, how you were thinking about playing professionally, given the state of women's soccer in the US at that time, and any financial implications that you remember thinking about as you were making those decisions.
Yeah, so for me, the professional league in the United States hadn't started yet. So I had gotten that advice that if you want to play pro, you're going to have to go abroad. You're going to have to go to Europe or Scandinavia. And at that time, Sweden was one of the top leagues for women's soccer. You know, Megan Rapinoe was playing over there, Hope Solo was playing over there, you know, Marta was playing over there. So I had an opportunity to go over there and play. And the day I graduated from Boston College, that night I was on a plane to fly over to Sweden, which was incredible. I think at that time, you know, I had just graduated college. I was really just thinking about the soccer piece, you know,
Yeah.
playing in one of the top leagues, playing professionally, signing my first pro contract. You know, I think the nice thing was when I signed that first contract, they were taking care of my cell phone, my internet, my housing. They were providing me with a car, and then along with that, there was you know, a salary that we received. So I think at that time, I wasn't really thinking necessarily from like a financial standpoint. I was just kind of thinking more about the soccer, but I was very happy that I signed a contract that, you know, took care of a lot of the ancillary expenses. You know, that definitely changed as I went on in my professional career. I started to realize that that's not the norm. You know,
Hmm.
that was a very good contract that I was able to sign. But to answer your question, I think initially when I first went to go play pro, I was not thinking, you know, from a financial standpoint necessarily. I was literally just thinking about the soccer and how excited I was to go play abroad.
Do you remember any financial challenges or being caught off guard by anything once you arrived in Sweden and had to deal with managing your own money in a foreign country?
Yeah, I mean, I think you think because they're taking care of housing and car and internet, you think, you know, any money that you make, you're just going to be pocketing that. And obviously that's not necessarily the case. I think expenses come up in whatever which way you know, they might. And I think sometimes too, like with contracts, especially in foreign countries, sometimes, you know, sometimes they say they're going to pay you on a monthly basis or they're going to take care of this, that, or whatever. And a lot of it's like maybe retroactive.
Hmm.
So, you know, it might be you paying for it up front and then them reimbursing you and
Yeah,
stuff like that. So I think there was definitely some things early on where I was like, oh, wait, I have to furnish my place, or oh, wait, I have to
sure.
um, you know, pay for groceries and things like that. You're not thinking about like the everyday you know, expenses that you incur you know, from like a day-to-day standpoint.
You may not at the time you may not have appreciated some of the benefits that came with playing in Sweden. Talk about your decision to go back to the States and play in the WPS once that became an option, and maybe some of the financial differences in moving to that league once it was underway.
Yeah, I mean, so I played in Sweden for about a year, and then the WPS, the Women's Professional Soccer League, that started up I was fortunate enough to be drafted in the first round, and selected to go play in St. Louis for the St. Louis Athletica. And it was a really big decision whether I was going to play back in the United States or if I was going to go back to Sweden and play. And even though honestly the money was better in Sweden, I thought it would just be nice to play in the inaugural league here,
Sure.
and just get back stateside so that my family can come watch me play. Um, so I signed with St. Louis, and similar situation where they were taking care of your housing, but they weren't taking care of your cell phone and stuff like that. So again, like I changed leagues and was making less money, had more expenses, but I was also like, in a place where I wanted to be, like back in the States. So I think I took a little bit of like, I kind of like sacrificed a little bit from a financial standpoint just to
Sure.
get back here to the United States. And I think that was the right move. Like I'm really happy that I did that. It was just really interesting from there to kind of see how the league from year to year changed. So the following year they didn't take care of your housing anymore. So maybe you made a small incremental bump from a financial standpoint, but now you're paying for your housing. And then I got traded to Atlanta, and they weren't paying for housing at all. I think in St. Louis it was subsidized a little bit, so you're paying like a cheaper cost of living. But then in Atlanta, like you had to find an apartment on your own, and you had to find roommates, whether that was teammates or external people or whatever the case might be. So and then my next year playing in Philly, they actually had us living in host families. So, it was just interesting to see how like every year they took away more from like a financial
Right.
standpoint, but still expected, essentially the same from us from a product standpoint.
Yeah.
So, I think after seeing all that, like you can kind of see why that first league folded. I think they threw a ton of money into everything the first year, and then I actually had one of the owners in the league tell me this, that there's something called owners fatigue, and they felt like they weren't necessarily getting the return on investment at the time, or they expected an immediate return on an investment instead of like a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. And so every year we were getting cut, more and more from a salary standpoint, from a housing standpoint, even resources from the team, things like that. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting how, even I started in Sweden, them paying for housing, your cell phone, everything. And then I went to St. Louis and, got a little less, but it was still decent. And then Atlanta and got a little less, but it was still decent.
Hmm.
And then same thing when I played in Philly. That was when they put us in host families because again, they couldn't necessarily afford to put us in housing. So yeah, that was definitely, some growing pains of the league. And obviously I'm happy that the league is a lot more sustainable and professional in a traditional sense now than it was back then.
Yeah. As the benefits worsened, did you ever have anyone in your ear, whether it was family or friends, um, suggesting that it might not be the best financial decision or long-term decision for you to continue playing?
My immediate circle, I think everybody still thought it was amazing that I was pursuing my dreams, in playing professional soccer. To be honest, if anybody really thought about it, it was probably me.
Okay.
Just having seen, how the league was trending at the time, and it being more and more difficult for me to make ends meet.
Yeah.
I think I think initially when I was in St. Louis and even in Sweden, I could live off of my salary. I was fine. But then once I got into Atlanta, I had to start, I had to start running private lessons. I had to, start coaching club teams. I had to start doing outside things to just make, ends meet financially. Even same thing when we were in Philly. There was a lot of us who worked camps or worked different things to be able to like make ends meet. So I think if anybody really thought about like questioned things a little bit, it was probably me.
Do you think those circumstances ever impacted your game at all? Like, did the financial realities of those leagues and maybe having to spend more of your time doing side gigs or being in housing that wasn't ideal, did you ever feel like it was impacting your performance on the field?
So, to some extent, especially now that I can kind of look back on it and reflect, I think being a professional athlete, there's a huge piece of that that's about, rest, recovery, even the resources around your recovery, getting
Hmm.
massages or, flush outs or going to acupuncture or things like that. And, if you feel like you need to go run training sessions at 8 p.m. at night, obviously you're not getting the rest that you need. And I know that that was even towards the end of my career when I was playing with the Boston Breakers. I was training with the Breakers. I think our training was like 8 a.m. By 10 a.m., I was going into at Boston College, working a full day there. And then at 6 p.m., I was doing my MBA classes. So I was getting home around 9 p.m. After having worked a full day and, then had to like rinse and repeat and do it all over again the next
Yeah.
day. And I think that's tough. I think that's tough on any person in general, but certainly for a professional athlete, because, you really want to be spending your time like, watching film and, doing ice baths and recovery. And I didn't have time for that a lot of the time.
Hmm.
So,
In 2014, you left the Boston Breakers to focus on school and coaching. You
mhm.
seem to be alluding to maybe some of the reasons why you made that decision. Can you talk a little bit more about that and whether the financial components of that had much impact in your decision?
Yeah, so at that point, I was playing with the Boston Breakers and kind of like I just said, I was kind of burning the candle at both ends, trying to do a little bit of everything. And at that time as well, because I was going back to get my MBA, um, Boston College had actually offered to pay for my MBA too. So not only were they paying me a salary at Boston College, which was actually higher than what I was making at the Breakers. They were also paying for my MBA, and so it got to a point where my head coach at the time, my boss at the time, she she kind of sat down and said, "Hey, I think you got to really decide like where you want to go with this. Do you want to continue to play professional soccer, or do you want to jump into the coaching realm of things?" And I think because a large piece of it was the financial piece. I couldn't leave my job at Boston College coaching because I needed that money,
Hmm.
and I think the easiest thing to cut at that point was, playing professionally. I had played for 6 years up to that point, and I felt like, I had kind of done everything that I wanted to do in that realm. And even though I think I retired a little bit early, in terms of like where I was as a player. I just felt like, financially and logistically, it probably made the most sense to hang up the boots and, focus at Boston College as a coach and then focus on my MBA as well. I thought at the time that I was going to just step away from for a year and finish my MBA and go back.
Hmm.
But I think, like most people will tell you, it's hard. It's hard once you've stepped away from the game. It's hard to get back into it that way. So yeah.
Some players are caught off guard by the need or the choice to retire. Did you see that conversation with your Boston College coach coming, or did that decision catch you by surprise a little bit?
No, to be honest, it kind of completely caught me off guard. She had been very supportive of my professional career, and um, I didn't know. I can understand it from her perspective because she wanted to have like a full-time assistant that was always going to be there and always going to be able to recruit. At this point, the professional league was 6 months, and then obviously the collegiate season was about four months or so. So She just wanted somebody who was going to be there full time year round, especially because I was making a full time salary with them. So I understand it from her perspective, but at the time, it definitely caught me off guard, and I wasn't expecting to have to make a choice.
Yeah.
But honestly, like in retrospect, I think it was probably the best thing for, the best thing that somebody forced me to make a choice.
What advice would you give to players who are in that position in the sense that they may not be ready to retire yet and they may still have plans to play one or more seasons? What would you have done differently to prepare for the decision and the timing to walk away, or what would you advise other players to do even when they're still fully committed to playing?
One thing that I would suggest for people is just that, women's soccer, unfortunately, I don't know it's something that, somebody can live the rest of their lives off of,
Hmm.
even um, Abby Wambach or Megan Rapinoe, or, there's a lot of people who've retired now, but they need to continue working, and those are some of the most famous names in women's soccer, and they
Hmm.
have to continue working. So certainly people like me and, the majority of the people who are playing professional soccer need to continue work after soccer. So I think the advice that I would give is just, try to figure out what your passions are, what you potentially want to do outside of soccer, and, just in small ways, like if there's a way for you to, um, you know, e- either, I don't want to say work in that industry because I know being a professional athlete is a full-time job, but I think even networking, going to conferences, putting feelers out there to people, I think is always a good thing. I think for me, me coaching while I was playing was something that, made me a better player, and it made me a better coach, being able to do that. But obviously, if you're somebody that's going into the medical industry or whatever, maybe you're not able to do both. But I
Hmm.
think like with the doctors that you're seeing and with your team doctor or whatever, like talk to them, like tell them, hey, this is something that I want to do once I'm done. Like, do you have any advice for me? Because I think that that's probably what people don't do enough of, is they get so absorbed in their soccer career that they're not really thinking, outside of that in terms of like what's next. And so I think that's probably the best thing that you can do is just kind of, put feelers out there, put ideas out there, and just try to have a plan B.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever too late to, or too early to think about a plan B.
If you could go back during your career and make any different financial choices, would you do anything differently? Do you have any regrets?
I mean, I think there's a lot of like misunderstandings, and I think I thought you had to make, I thought you had to have $50,000 in the bank and be making $100,000 in order to invest. And, it wasn't, um, it wasn't until actually I got offered the head job here at Brown. I was living with a family friend in Rhode Island, and they've done well for themselves by their own right, and they were just giving me some advice, now being a head coach at Brown, what that meant, how I need to leverage that position. And he had asked me, like, are you saving, are you investing? And I kind of laughed. I was like, oh my gosh, no, like. And he was like, okay, well, you need to do that. And I was like, I don't know that I have the money to do that. And he was the one that was kind of like, if you have any money, start investing, or start putting your money away. And I think that at that point, that's what made me, kind of reframed my thinking around finances, about and things like that, because I met, that same year, he connected me with a financial advisor, and I think I started just put $100 away.
Hmm.
I invested $100, and then I saw how that grew to $500, and then over the years, like you start to see like that money multiplying, and I think at that point I was thinking, gosh, I'm 29. Like, imagine if I had done this when I was, 21,
Hmm.
and I think it was at that point that really made me feel like, wow, if there's like a piece of advice that I would give my younger self, or even, young professionals who's starting now, whether it's soccer related or not, it's just to like put a little money away, and I don't think you need to have $50,000 or what, everybody thinks you need to have a certain salary or whatever, but you don't, so I think that was a nice piece.
Do you have any sense for what the biggest barriers are for players being more open with each other about some of the things they could and should be doing at younger ages, even if their salaries aren't particularly high?
I think I mean, to be honest, I just think it's like a lack of education and understanding around it. I think if people I think that even for me, when I was doing my MBA and taking some of those classes, like, it's like a foreign language. And so I think if there's somebody who can really speak in layman's terms about investing, about finances, I think that's going to open a lot of doors for people to even want to learn and understand, what their financial future could look like. Because I know for me, like, it's intimidating a little bit, to really understand, um, you know, certain things with investments and retirement planning. And I started my own LLC, and there's a lot of things that come with that. And so I think having somebody who can kind of speak to your level and I don't want to say dumb it down a little bit, but just put it in terms that are a little bit more understandable for the normal person. I think that, to be honest, I think that's probably the biggest barrier, because I don't think it's a matter of people don't want to do it. I think people just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. For players nearing retirement who may be interested in coaching, what are some of the financial realities of making that transition from player to coach at any level?
Yeah, it's a really good question because um you know, I think that the difficult part from transitioning to a player to coach is a lot of times you might be leaving the professional world because of finances, and then you get into coaching, and a lot of times you're starting at the bottom there too,
Hmm.
So, some of the rules with soccer have changed now, but a lot of times you had to start as a volunteer assistant, and volunteers, you're making very little to no money. You might be making camp money, a little bit here and there, but sometimes if you're a volunteer, you're only making like $10,000 a year, $15,000 a year. But the hope is after you spend a year or two being a volunteer, then you're going to get a full-time position.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that's what was really nice, is that I started as a volunteer at Boston College, and then a full-time position came open while I was playing professionally. So I was able to kind of do both, but I think that wasn't the norm. And I've had a lot of friends who got into the coaching industry and almost had to start from the bottom when they were 32 years old, 33 years old. And so yeah, I mean, I think my best advice if people want to get into coaching is to leverage your platform now. With you being a professional athlete, whether it's you starting your own business, training kids, or doing a camp under your own name, or asking a college coach, hey, can I come work your camp this summer? Just trying to network and learn and put your name out there. I think that's probably the best way to get your foot in the door. And then once you're at that point where you're ready to retire or hang the boots up, I think, hopefully you'll have a good enough network to be able to pivot and do that.
Since you started coaching, will you talk a little bit about how NIL has changed how you approach recruiting and how you engage with potential players in general? And the financial aspects of that in college sports?
I mean, obviously it's relatively new, NIL. I think for women's soccer it hasn't affected us to the degree that it has for men's football and men's basketball right now, but it's
Hmm.
definitely something that's creeping in, especially at the Power Four level. And so I'll say that I think a lot more players are interested in knowing, um, what their return on investment is, coming to Brown, or, they'll look at a full scholarship at, a certain school, and then they're like, okay, but Brown, it's just financial aid. So, trying to figure out which one is better just from like a financial standpoint that way. So
Hmm.
I think we've had a lot more conversations with people in the past because now not only can you get a full scholarship, but you can get NIL money on top of that, like, and essentially get paid on top of that. And the Ivy League hasn't hasn't completely embraced the idea of NIL, even though I honestly think the league should, because I think you could easily be one of the most competitive leagues in the country
Yeah.
if you really embrace that and tried to jump into it. But I think it just kind of goes against a little bit more of our foundational roots as a league. So we've kind of leaned into a lot more of like the resources that we can provide in terms of alumni networks and job opportunities and summer internships, and like really leaning into that, and with the idea that instead of us just giving you a check and you not doing anything from that, we'll give you a check and give you the job experience. So there's this thing here at Brown called Spark, where the players tell us, hey, this is the industry that I'm interested in. We connect them with an alumni or several alumni in that industry. They kind of do like an internship where they're bouncing around the country, learning different things from those various companies, and then they get a check, for to kind of go through that experience. So it's our version of NIL, but it's also
Yeah.
just trying to be creative and give them the job opportunity and the networking piece as well, not just the financial aspect.
That's great. Yeah, maybe it'll
Yeah.
make more people pay attention to savings and investings at a younger age, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if you had a hypothetical player at Brown who was considering going pro, but also looking into alternative careers,
Mhm.
given where the women's game is at this point in time, how would you advise them to navigate the choice of like playing professionally, stopping playing and doing something else, playing abroad compared to playing in the U.S.? What's your perspective on the state of those decisions at this point?
Honestly, like my advice to players has never changed. I mean, since I've been a coach, I always encourage people to go play. Like, if you still have the itch in you to continue playing after your senior year, I think everybody should go do it. I think if you're somebody that maybe missed out on going abroad during your 4 years of college, I think you should go play professionally abroad. I think it's amazing to immerse yourself in another culture, in another country, learn a new language. I think it makes you appreciate the game a lot more, having lived somewhere else, and just like appreciate the world a little bit more, and
Hmm.
open your eyes to different people and different values and things like that. So I think I think for me it hasn't changed in terms of like encouraging people to go play pro. I think um when it's time to hang up the boots, like, you'll know when it just doesn't make financial sense. You'll know when it doesn't make logistical sense. You'll know when maybe family circumstances change, and it forces you to come back home and have a little bit more of like a steady 9 to 5. So, but I think, if there's any time to take a risk and to be selfish and to kind of think of yourself, I think it's like right after college, like, because you're never going to have, that time, that kind of independence back again,
Yeah.
and it is all about you at that point and what your passions are. So we've had players who, um, like, I just had a player who's playing pro in Portugal. She actually accepted a job at JP Morgan, but deferred it for a year so that she could go play professionally for a year. So, I think there's ways that you can be creative and, not pass up a job necessarily, but still pursue your passions of playing professionally, if that's what you want to do. So we've had a lot of players who went to go play and then maybe they came back to go get their master's degree, or came back and we had a player that came back and she was working on Wall Street, so I think there's definitely opportunity to do both, but I think you got to make sure that you're leveraging your network, and kind of putting feelers out there before you get to that point where you're at the end of the road.
That's great. And that's a great segue to my last question, um, which is, you clearly made some choices over time where you prioritized yourself, or your desire to play over, just dollars. What does the phrase like financial success mean to you at this point, given your experiences as a player and now as a coach?
Yeah, I think financial success for me, um, probably looks like stability. I feel like, throughout my time, certainly playing in the pros and even in my younger years, I I know what it's like to kind of look at your bank account on Monday and you're like, oh wow, how am I going to get to Friday? And you know, I think just having a little bit more like long-term security, I think is something also that I think about when I think of financial success. Not feeling like you're just living on like a day-to-day or a month-to-month, paycheck or whatever the case may be, like
Hmm.
just feeling like you have a little bit of financial security if something were to happen, something to kind of fall back on. So I think for me, financial success just is about stability and long-term security.
Kia, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful, and good luck next season.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Of course.